I have a conspiracy theory that modern occultists will read about 4 chapters of a book and then forget what is in the rest of the book 90% of the time. I myself have done this quite often, and I try to go back in these videos and go back through the books that I'm talking about with a fresh lens so that I actually remember them and I'm not just talking about some vague memory that misrepresents a book. The book that actually inspired this conspiracy theory might actually shock you, though. That book is actually The Kybalion, a book that many people have probably not heard about in a long time. So today I want to go through it a little bit, specifically Chapter 2, which is where we get the most popular sections. So, let's get into that. I am Dave the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel, link in the description of the Patreon where you can get exclusive access to videos early, Patreon exclusive content, and the Occultic Manual series, which is a monthly write-up that I aim at being more instructional than what I have here on the channel, and less unapproachable than some of the old grimoires I like to reference on the channel. If any of that sounds of interest to you, looking forward to seeing you over there, and if you are already supporting me on Patreon, you have my thanks for your continued and ongoing support. When I was first getting into the occult, the Kybalion was one of those books that everyone recommended as kind of an entry point, because at the time we didn't know any better. The Kybalion is effectively a Cliff Notes version of all of the things that you would learn from the Corpus Hermeticum if you are too lazy to read the Corpus Hermeticum, which I highly recommend you should read the Corpus Hermeticum. The book was originally published in 1908, and it was attributed under the pen name of The Three Initiates, because they were written by one guy who was not initiated. In actuality, what the Kybalion is it is a New Thought book written by a New Thought writer who is trying to appear like it is a Hermetic text. This is, of course, not the case. The Kybalion is definitively a New Thought book. It is not actually Hermetic at all. However, there are 7 principles in Chapter 2 that are laid out quite nicely, and that people who are Hermetic tend to use because they're functionally suitable enough to where you can just explain them to people and people will agree with you, because they are more or less objectively true, though they do take some explaining just because we are dealing with metaphysical concepts, and metaphysical concepts are sometimes very difficult to wrap your head around. There are 7 principles given in the Kybalion. The first is the principle of mentalism, which is given a wonderful little tagline of, "The all is mind, the universe is mental." This is stating that everything begins in the mind, and that everything is part of the unknowable universal mind. Practically what this means is that your mind is the key to the entire universe. If you think about something and you try to figure it out logically and using your actual mind, you can eventually do anything you want, basically. Now, this might take some reframing of your initial idea, but you can eventually get there. This is what this principle is trying to say. The second principle is where we get that wonderful phrase of "as above, so below," as below, so above, as it's said. I've also heard some people say, "as above, so below, as within, so without," which is a much more accurate term. This says that there is a above, the macrocosm, and you are the microcosm. You are the microcosm to the macrocosm, and things that are reflected within you are reflected in the macrocosm, and vice versa. This one is very easy to prove. If you look at somebody's room, you will be able to read and tell yourself about that individual based on what they have filled their room with. If I go ahead and fill my bookshelf with a bunch of occult books, chances are that I'm probably an occultist, especially if I have various different kinds of occult paraphernalia and a functional altar set up right next to it. The third is the law of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This is going to be a different one. I would say that this is better suited to be the principle of resonance, or something to that effect. What this is saying is that everything vibrates, and the higher frequency it vibrates at, the higher it is in the kind of spiritual cosmos, so to speak. Basically, this is just saying things can be higher or lower in terms of a kind of spiritual hierarchy, which feeds into the next law, which is the law of polarity. This basically says that everything is a sliding scale. Up and down are sliding scales where you have center in the middle there. Left and right are sliding scales. Hot and cold are sliding scales. So on, so forth. Sharp, dull, light, dark. You should be able to come up with your own by this point. Next, we have the principle of rhythm. Everything flows in and out. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the same to the measure of the left. Rhythm compensates. This is basically saying that everything will go from one aspect of the scale to the other. If you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. Night is the opposite of day, and we cycle between night and day all the time. We go through and everything is going to flow in and out, right? Left is eventually, if you go too far left, you will eventually get right, and vice versa. For a more practical situation, if you are happy, you will eventually become sad. If you are sad, that will eventually pass and you will eventually become happy again. And that is the way that the universe should work. And from there we have the law of cause and effect, or the principle. If I've been calling them laws, they're supposed to be principles, doesn't really matter. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. If you throw a dice up into the air, and you are trying to roll the dice by throwing it up into the air, and you're waiting for it to go onto the table, it would make sense that that dice would fall to the ground. That is because of gravity. You have thrown the dice up into the air, you were the cause of it being thrown up into the air, and gravity causes it to fall to the ground. Effectively, you and gravity are working in tandem to create a randomized roll of a dice. One of the things that occultists are much more interested in is the esoteric movers, the esoteric causes. Typically in my videos I will call these the astrological powers. I'm a very firm believer in astrology, and astrology is one of those things that is going to cause a massive amount of change in people's lives, whether you like it or not. This is why, according to this principle, you need to become the cause of change instead of being the target that is being affected. You want to be the cause, not a result of the effects of people causing things, and people, spirits, the higher forces, your own subconscious thoughts. There are so many things that could be potentially causing various different states of issues or happiness even, that you want to be in control of your own life. The final principle is the principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. This is also true and can take a little bit of rephrasing. Rephrasing here being that everyone has a receptive and a projective aspect to them. Everything does. The Hermeticum explains this quite easily in that everyone has a male and female aspect to them, but the Kybalion doesn't do a very good job of explaining it, so I will explain it here. The Kybalion goes ahead and is mostly concerned with effectively using gender as a metaphor for reproduction, so I'm going to explain it this way. You can prove to yourself that you have a receptive aspect to yourself and a projective aspect to yourself. If you don't believe that you have a receptive aspect to yourself, stop breathing inward. Well, Dave, I'm not really, trying to do that. Well, if you're not receptive, then you are not receiving air into your lungs. Likewise, if you don't think you have a projective aspect to yourself, then stop breathing outwards. And stop talking, even. In this regard, you might say, well, water doesn't really have a projective aspect to it. Well, yeah, it kinda does, if you think about it. If you have enough water and you go to the ocean, eventually waves will wash up on the beach. These waves would be the projective aspect of water. The element of fire in the classical element system is said to be the most projective and the most destructive. But even fire needs to consume something to burn it. Effectively, it needs to take something in, receptive, feminine, in this gender analysis, in order to continue projecting. I've always found these 7 Hermetic principles listed in the Kybalion to be a fairly easy to understand kind of a step 1 for people who are looking to get into occult theology and occult metaphysics. But I've personally found that as I have developed my practice, the actual book itself is not nearly as good. For example, there is the principle of polarity where it says that hot versus cold are going to be 2 sides of a different sliding scale. But then in the chapter on polarity, it kind of makes the claim that one polarity is always going to be inherently better than the other. It's going to be better. So, like, sharpness is going to be better than dullness, and hot is going to be better than cold. Now, I'm currently recording this in the middle of winter, which I would say that hot is going to be much better than cold. But if I'm going through and in the summertime, I would say that maybe the cold would be more preferred there. Maybe I would want to be, that's why I turn on air conditioning. So I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think that polarities have their place. And it goes into a very strange cosmology that I have not seen mimicked basically anywhere. It goes ahead and says that there are 7 aspects to the mental world, and then it immediately proceeds to attribute those to the elementals. So, yeah. I'm not a fan of the rest of the book, but I find that the Kybalion Chapter 2, if you're new to the occult, has always been, and probably always will be, a good step 1. That being said, read better occult books than this. Read Chapter 2 if you must. I have been Dave the Amateur Magus. Hope everyone is having a good day. If you're not having a good day, hope your day gets better. Take it easy, take care.